So we have a great panel. This is hopefully going to be, our objective is for everybody here to walk away with one or two things that they can think about or do differently. We actually wanted to start, I wanted to start by asking, are most people in here B2B? Because it makes a little bit of a difference. Do we have any consumer marketers here? A few? Okay. Because I think some of the things we'll talk about, to me, one of the things that's really important is keep it open with the lens of what kind of product and service that you have, and obviously that's going to affect things. So if you're a high velocity SaaS business, that is a little bit of a different lens than if you're selling an enterprise and your deal cycles are really long. So that's one of the first things that we wanted to start off with, just keeping that perspective in mind, and we'll do our best to kind of start with that a little bit depending on the questions. The other thing that I wanted to highlight is today, I think most people in here want to be revenue drivers for their company, especially if they're in marketing. Are most people in here in marketing? Yes? Okay. But I'm just going to put it out there that most people we kind of often see are not. So we're kind of going to be a little bit provocative, and I'd actually like to kick it off. I'm going to start with Steve with one of the first questions. And today, what's one of the things culturally you feel is important to do to be seen as a revenue driver within your company?
Introduce ourselves.
Oh yeah, please introduce yourself. Sorry. I'm just getting right into it. I'm so excited.
Good afternoon. First thing, it's 4 o'clock. Thank you for staying. Appreciate it. We'll try and keep you entertained. So Stephen Wastie, work for a company called Origami Logic. We have a SaaS platform. We typically work with large consumer brands, P&G, Kellogg's, and others, doing marketing analytics. So we pull in data and help them optimize their marketing spend. So with that out the way, so I think it's pretty safe to say most of us, if you've been around a few traditional sort of B2B enterprise software companies, typically your sales team have not viewed you as a revenue driver. I think that's a pretty common situation. I think there are a few things that need to happen. First off, SaaS, high velocity, try and buy, all of that stuff has made it way easier for marketing to be able to play a role in that. So I think it's changing actually. But first thing is for sure is culture, an alignment on respective roles in the company. Eliminate those silos that can exist particularly within larger companies. Do those daily stand-ups and daily pipeline reviews and those kind of things. So I just think culturally, and that works its way into compensation, incentives, and so forth. So I think that's the first thing. Second thing is just having a very common understanding of shared metrics and shared accountability. And so making sure that marketing doesn't come up with a set of metrics that it thinks are important, things like impressions and other things that most salespeople don't care about. And really what sales wants is just high quality leads that convert on a one-to-one basis. You have to bridge that gap somehow. So I think just getting a very common understanding and revisiting that continuously. And so that may work its way down into, okay, you have a land and expand business. Well, is marketing responsible for new business, also for expansion business? If that's the case, well, is that 60-40? Is it 80-20? Or what is that? If you're a channel business, then how much are you supposed to work with the channel? So indirect and direct. Do you have a top of funnel issue, or are you more focused on conversion? Right, you focus on origination or influence. So all of those things that we have to deal with every day. Making sure there's complete alignment across, not just sales management, but also the individual salespeople on the ground. And then you have the field marketing teams as well as the CMOs fully aligned on that as well. So I think that's super key, and continuing to revisit that is important versus doing the once a year planning thing, which really doesn't work either. And then the third thing I think is just having a common set of metrics. So I think, has anybody been in a meeting where you show up, marketing shows up with one set of data, and then sales shows up with another set of data?
That's never happened to
never
anyone
happens,
in here,
right?
ever. No.
So I think this happened a few times.
Sales is always right.
Yeah, exactly. So whatever your tools are to make that happen, that common, authoritative, trusted data set, and that hierarchy of metrics and KPIs and systems that inform those metrics and KPIs. And people are using the same formulas for calculations of ROI or whatever it may be. Super key. So you don't want to be in that situation where you're debating the validity of the data that you're looking at. Everyone needs to be looking at the same data. Otherwise, you're screwed basically. So
Thanks, Steve. I want to pass it over to Sydney and get your perspective on that as well, too. But I want to be a little bit provocative because I think telling people, we want the same set of metrics and we want to do certain things, but to me it's a little bit how. How do you come into an organization new and fresh? And I'd love to get, your introduction and kind of your perspective on that because it's hard. There's a lot of CEOs out there who think marketing, your job's designing hats or doing events. So some people have that perception, and changing that, you can have all the meetings in the world, but that's going to be tough. So I'd like to hear your perspective.
Sure. So I'm Sydney Sloan. I'm the CMO at Alfresco. I've been there the last 3 years. We're an open source content and process automation platform. First I would start off, I have to tell a joke. And I don't know if you guys all still pay attention to Dilbert, but one of my favorite Dilberts is he's thinking about changing roles. And so he's going through and he's like, I might want to be an engineer. And he says, well, you need more folds in your brain if you're going to be an engineer. And if you guys know Dilbert. And he's like, well, maybe I'll try marketing. He goes, oh yeah, that's just guessing and liquor. So I always thought that was pretty funny. But it is more than that. And
the liquor part's good though.
Hats and liquor. So what we've done at Alfresco, and I'm lucky to have a great relationship with my CRO, I think it starts there. And where you do set your set metrics and have shared set of data. So we've connected our systems. We've connected Marketo and Salesforce. But we were still running off different sets of data. So we made our sales analyst and marketing analyst sit together and finally run off the same report. So that was the first step in doing that. And just really seeing where we were in terms of contribution and making an agreement as to what that percentage of contribution would be based on historical. So it wasn't guessing, it was actually based on data. And I had to kind of negotiate to that point as to what our contribution of closed won was. So we worked back from closed won. So we started with revenue and said, what's our contribution to closed won? And then backed into it from there. The interesting thing was once we agreed to what the numbers is, she always gives me a higher number. So I agreed to 35% of closed won, and every time she stands up in front of a group, she says 50%, and then my team always freaks out. But she's just trying to make a point that her team needs to be responsible for half, and somewhere else the other half shall come. So I think that's the first thing. So it's coming to grips of what it is, starting with revenue, and then definitely having that shared view of the same data, the same reports that we look at every day.
That's great. So Rick, I'd love your perspective on that as well too, and how you kind of have, you recently joined Databricks and that's obviously new, and so how did you come in there and kind of set that tone right away?
Yeah, thanks, Heidi. Rick Shultz, CMO at Databricks, been there about 6 months. Databricks is a unified analytics platform built on Apache Spark. It's co-founded by the team that created Apache Spark. I've been there about 6 months, and sort of similar to what Sydney said, very focused on getting that shared goals and the alignment with the chief revenue officer and his team. SDRs do not report, the development reps do not report into marketing, they report into sales. But having that joint accountability is so key, and having marketing take responsibility for deals and opportunities, then that way everyone's all in it together, right? And then as Steve said, you gotta make sure you're all working off the same data. So running the meetings off the same data, the same metrics, looking at the funnel together. But having the shared accountability for opportunities in building pipe really drives the right behavior across marketing and sales, and everyone has skin in the same game. I think the other thing about it though is also it's super important on how you build the team and what kind of culture you build. You can't just set the metrics. So the way I think about how you build a marketing team is really critical to this. So I always look for sort of 3 general attributes in addition to like the functional skill depending on the role I'm hiring for. So I always look for people who are super collaborative because you can't achieve the opportunity goals you set. If you set some pretty aggressive pipeline goals, you can't achieve it unless you're working across the functions in marketing, but you also have to have people who really enjoy working with sales and want to work with sales and aren't just kind of hibernating and kind of working on whatever campaign they're on or what have you. They have to be engaging with sales regularly to make sure you're achieving that goal. The second is kind of ambitious, aggressive goal setters, because the other thing you could do is you could easily get into making the data say what you want it to say and kind of sandbagging and setting up some easy goals, and then that's no fun because then you end up building kind of like an average marketing machine, right? And none of us want to be an average marketing team or average marketing machine. So those are 2 things, and then the third is you want to get analytic thinkers on the team, because the thing is, once you set a pretty aggressive goal, then you've got to think about all the ways you're going to be able to hit that goal, right? And so you want people who are asking questions, asking the right kind of questions, and thinking about things a little bit differently as well.
That's great. So one thing I wanted to ask all of you, and I'm actually curious about with the audience too. So we heard kind of having a shared revenue model. We heard having the right set of metrics that everyone agrees on and sort of the right handoffs. Do any of you also incentivize your teams financially? So that's one thing that I've always kind of been a big believer in, is if you want to incentivize marketers to care about revenue, guess what? Make it part of how they're paid. It makes a really big difference, and that's really foreign for a lot of people. And I'm curious how many of you actually do that, where marketers actually part of their variable is actually based on opportunity numbers or pipeline.
Yeah, I think it still amazes me when you go into an organization, you take a new job and people aren't compensated with some variable piece to their package. That always blows me away. It doesn't always have to be revenue, right? But it has to be something they can obviously impact. So, whatever that is, and it's going to be different on the role, but making sure there's some business impact versus some fluffy marketing metric that they can get paid on. I think it gives them that shared sense of accountability. So I every time I think you have to do that. I think you're missing a trick if you don't do that.
Yeah, similar thing. We do it primarily through MBO. At my last company, we experimented a little bit with even more variable comp than that, but it kind of ends up winding its way back to being by MBO. But there are certain roles where you have like direct accountability for opportunity creation, that kind of thing.
So we do it at the company level. So we do revenue and retention at the company level in the last company as well. But what was really interesting recently is, I don't know what I was thinking, but I volunteered to take over the SDR team. And it drives me crazy, and I told this to the team as well, that it shouldn't change the nature of how we think about our job. Right, that we're working really hard to create campaigns, to create leads, to bring those leads through to the salespeople, but it did culturally change how we thought about that. For some reason now, we care more about how that SDR is handling that lead, and are they hitting their 12 meetings per SDR per month, and so the SDR absolutely gets paid on every single opportunity that they open up, and somehow my team has now cared more about that than when they were sitting in sales. So, I mean, it has changed behavior. I wish it hadn't, because it should have been there all along, but it did.
Yeah, and I can say for myself, I'm actually comped on opportunities in pipeline at Engagio, and I also have my team. That's part of how they're paid as well. Because I find that when they actually have that number and they see it, it becomes really real for them. So if we're not tracking, what as a team are we going to do to actually change that? It's not, oh, that's kind of the ADRs and they're not doing their piece. I think it puts more skin in the game. It's just something for everyone to think about. How do you, I'm going to ask you this, Sydney, how kind of in today's business do you feel like you're aligning with other teams? So many of us here are not just thinking about acquisition, we're thinking about other parts like retention, we're talking about upsell, cross-sell, even loyalty. One, what pieces of that do you own, and how do you align with other teams, especially when you're at larger companies? Customer success might be in a whole other geography. Can you talk to that?
Sure. So when we think about go-to-market, we think about marketing, sales, and customer success. And where we see, the way that we think about it is net new customer acquisition and then cross-sell and upsell. And as we've evolved, the way that my team looks at it and how we're structured is there's kind of people that are working at top of funnel. They're trying to get like the global campaigns in place. And then we merged customer marketing and field marketing together, and they really work on kind of the closed one conversion, cross-sell, upsell for mostly for existing accounts, and that's how they're tying together. So my customer marketing person is very tied to customer success. So she's working with the renewal reps, trying to get to see what's going on there and our top accounts, and then now that that's partnered with field marketing, when I look at when I do an event, I always want to know how much money is sitting in the room. Mm-hmm. And so we'll look at how much pipeline is sitting in the room and how much renewal is sitting in the room and what impact are we having for that particular event. So we think about it collectively in that manner. I probably could be doing more for customer success. In my previous role, we were a little bit more sophisticated at that company, and we were running at scale, cross-sell, upsell programs, driving different levels of engagement, but we're not mature enough for that yet, so we'll get there.
One thing I think that's interesting about that is it really helps you think about your ideal customer profile, because when you own the whole piece, if you're just focused on acquisition, you might bring in a type of company that then ultimately churns. So I like that you do that.
Definitely, and I'll add one more thing. I'm not sure if it was talked about this morning, so I apologize if it's a repeat. But the most important part of a customer's life cycle, and as us who buy technology, we get to experience the other side of that. That first 90 days is critical, and how you treat the customer to ensure that they're set up for success, and the programs that you put in place. And so, looking at those aspects, and what we would do in the first 90 days was go back and collect who else in the account do I need to know about, and role map those people. So it wasn't who I sell to that actually is going to be who I continue to want to market to. I maybe want to market to end users. I maybe want to market to more of the developers inside the organization. Like, really think about who is it that is responsible for adoption, usage, and growth, which were not necessarily the same people that were responsible for selecting and purchasing.
Right. Steve, can you kind of address that same question? How is your team structured? And how do you, again, even if there's a team that ultimately isn't reporting into you, how do you ensure you're aligned and you ultimately are getting the results that you want to see?
So I own sales as well as marketing, which is a little strange. So depending on what side of the face I'm talking from, but so one of the reasons we brought those things together was it was very clear to us that one, we need to be very rigorous around our customer profiling, making sure we had that propensity model really down pat. Because we were finding we were talking to a lot of people that were super interested in the category but weren't far enough along their maturity cycle, and so we were doing a lot of education, which as a small startup you don't have time to do a lot of. So we got a lot more rigorous about that, and so one of the things we found during that process is, one, be rigorous about that, and secondly, have absolute clarity on how that engagement journey really kind of manifests itself, and how do we make sure that that is as frictionless as possible. And so when we think about handoffs and team members and who's doing acquisition, who's doing the first call, setting up discovery calls and demos and custom demos and all that stuff. So we brought that together into a very kind of tightly sort of joined at the hip kind of teaming basis with the SDR team, with marketing, with the AEs, and then also the customer success teams and the technical consulting teams as well. So we brought that all under me, partially because we wanted to reduce the silos and make sure there was no friction between the various handoffs. And actually there aren't handoffs in many cases. And so we think about it also in terms of a time horizon. So there's some people who think about the quarter, and there are some people who think much more about lifetime value. And when we think about some of the partnerships that impact our likelihood of expanding in an account, because we tend to be a pretty consensus-driven sale in our case, we have to have a sort of 60 to 90 day view, and then also a 3-4 year view. We've been shipping product for about 4 years now. We've had a few customers that are into their 4th year of working with us, and we've expanded every quarter with them. And so we have to think about that and make sure that when you think about friction, reducing friction at the front end, getting those quick wins, getting those first deployment wins. You can't wait for 3-4 months before you get something deployed, and the people who made the decision to buy you are still sitting there waiting for the first thing to hit. You got to do that quickly. But then what drives that, has driven that sort of lifetime values and expansion business for us is all product, all experience, I wouldn't say, not even just product experience, but experience. So program management becomes super critical for us, and just maintaining expectations, because this stuff is really hard. Mm-hmm. One of our customers has 8,000 different data sources they pull into our platform, and you're doing data validation across hundreds of millions of metrics every day. There's just always going to be issues in that, right? And you probably have the same kind of issues in your business, but so just maintaining expectations and making sure that that experience, both on the product side and then also just enhanced in terms of how we engage with them. And so customer success is super important, really tied into the account teams. The implementation people kind of never really go off. They kind of stay on, just dial back their time. But having that kind of closed loop, to use an old phrase, but that start to finish engagement, kind of the reverse funnel, where you get the first close, and then actually that's just the start of your business. That's super important for us. So in a complex sale like like we're in our business, it's super important to have that entire acquisition through to 4 years in with multiple expansion deals completely lined up with no points of friction along the way.
And you kind of addressed that, sometimes the folks that are thinking about acquisition, it might be almost a different mindset than people that are thinking about lifetime value. And Rick, like how with your team have you kind of thought about that? Do you hire different people? What are some of the processes you put in place? Because I think, it's kind of a lot of this stuff like sounds good, right? Like, yeah, of course, there's no one out there that's like, we shouldn't be aligned. But like, how do you do it? Do you feel like it's, how the teams you hire, like walk us through that a little bit.
Yeah, well, I talked a little bit earlier about the profile I hire in terms of being very collaborative, really driven, and very analytic thinking. As far as, I'm a big believer in goal setting, so as you assemble the team, you really got to have involvement, like strong involvement in the goal setting. So you have the overarching goal of opportunity creation, pipeline, deals, whatever, and you have to have that handshake with sales and to be playing a role in driving revenue. But then you also have to have other stepping stone goals that are going to get you there, right? And rather than me sit in a room and come up with those, I always try to like get everyone involved in coming up with what those should be. For example, even something as simple as like website traffic, right? Like other organizations, I think kind of look at me sometimes like, why do we care about that? Why are we even measuring like website traffic? And it's like, well, first of all, it's a pretty good proxy for whether your awareness is growing, right? And I could go do an expensive brand survey, but we're a startup and I don't have the time or budget I want to allocate to that.
Or if there's a problem, if it goes down, it's good to kind of know that.
Yeah, exactly. You want to be growing your site traffic, right? The question is about how much and how are you going to do it, right? And so I always let the team get pretty involved in figuring that out. It's also like the biggest and best source of our leads, right? So, that's just an example of a stepping stone goal, but we usually have like 10 goals for a given period of time, whether a quarter or half year. But everybody's involved in like creating and helping set those and decide like what makes sense for us as a business, knowing what we really need to get to in the end game. So involvement is kind of a big one. And then the second step is like personalizing it, making sure all the managers it trickles down. So not every goal is equally weighted, but everybody should probably play some role in most of the goals. So even if you're in like PR, AR, or what have you, you might think it only maps to awareness goals, but it might not. It actually might play a role in demand gen goals, right? Like we need some tier 1 analyst reports to be able to, drive demand around those. We need to be in this Gartner MQ and we need to, what have you. So that's just an example, but I think really it's about the involvement and trickling it down. And then the third thing is the communication and constant review of, how we're tracking.
Okay, cool. I want to move to initiatives a little bit. So this panel's about driving revenue, and I'd love to hear from all of you. Is there one kind of key initiative or program, and I know it's never just one, but something you've done this year that you felt has really helped impact revenue? And that could even be, a data project. That could be anything, but or even a technology that you've brought on. And I'll start with Sydney. But that kind of just for the audience, that one thing that you have felt that's been helpful this year for that.
So I'm going to answer it, but I can't give you an outcome yet. But it's one of the things I'm most proud of. And I think it's really hard to have the end sales rep see the value of some of the bigger programs. And so they look to their field marketer as their person, but don't realize that there's all this behind them. So one of the things that we have continued to do is move kind of up market from being a developer play to a C-level play. And so as an organization, we said, number one priority is more meetings. We want to track meetings, the number of meetings, the number of C-level and VP meetings that we're having. And the original goal was 100 meetings. And so I said, okay, we'll sign up for that. Totally in. I can get you in front of people, and we'll do that. Well, 6 weeks into the second quarter, we had our sales leadership meeting. And we said, there's 500 and some odd C-level leads that are sitting in your queues, people, and they hadn't seen them because we decided that SDRs shouldn't talk to C-level people, that the sales rep should, and all the RVPs were floored. They didn't realize. It was like, well, we've been telling you, they're there, and it was really a wake-up call to say, I can get C-level leads, but how are you going to follow up on them? And so we put a task force together to then say, okay, here's our combined effort on how sales and marketing are going to follow up on those leads. And we put in this pretty sophisticated multi-touch program, and now on a weekly basis we have reports, and we're meeting 10 a week. Again, going to my favorite CRO, she changed that metric from 100 to 900 at some point that I missed. I'm like, what? Well, she was like, well, I changed it for my team, so it's changed for you. But we're on track, and the rigor at which we're doing it together, I think, is the key lesson. So where I can't say, because I'm a 12 to 18 month sales cycle, it's hard in those kinds of complex sales to say what immediate impact you have. But when you're saying meetings booked, and I can draw a line between what my team did and how sales picked that up and how many meetings we're having and what's working, that's a good indication. Sorry if that was a long-winded answer, but yeah.
That's a great answer. First of all, I'm a big believer on the demand generation side that different programs fit different needs. So and also different companies and different audiences. So there's not one size fits all by any dimension. Whether it's flywheel or ABM or whatever model, you really have to step back and look at, well, what is the need here for the business, and also how are we set up? Like, do we have a huge inside sales team and only two reps in the field, or are we mostly a field enterprise sales team trying to get into larger named accounts, or is it some mix and some balance? So there are a lot of different programs. I think I'm going to say the one thing we've done at Databricks in my first 6 months that's had the most impact, though, is not a demand gen thing. It's actually a messaging thing, more core product marketing principles, and it's actually just getting consistency and now starting to demonstrate stamina around the way we describe what we are, which is a unified analytics platform, and the way we describe our value proposition, which is accelerating innovation by unifying data science, data engineering teams with the business. And then there's a whole bunch of pillar messaging underneath that I won't go through with all you guys. But essentially, it's so important, it's so overlooked. If you think about your company, and if you were to walk down the hall at your office and ask 10 people, how do you describe our product, would you get 10 answers that are all the same, and would they be short and succinct? And what's our biggest differentiation and value prop? And would you get 100% the same answer every time? And maybe some of you wouldn't, that's great. If you do, then you have good message consistency. But it's so important to have message consistency, meaning it's the same in every channel. Doesn't mean you can't add a layer of messaging for an industry or something, but at the core, describing what you do and what your value prop is has to be the same through all channels. And then you have to demonstrate stamina, meaning you have to do it over a couple of years. You can't just say, well, I just talked to a customer the other day and it gave me a different idea for my messaging, so I'm going to change it, because messaging takes time to stick in the market.
Never happens. That never happens.
That never happens, yeah.
I guess two things. One, we put in this tool recently. The SDR team and the AEs love it. It's called Outreach. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Outreach. There are a ton of these tools for how you handle email interactions, but everyone loves it. It's great. It's a great vehicle for us to scale up our SDR capability and put in these sequences of messaging and so forth. So if that's part of your model, I'd suggest you look at that. Secondly, a little bit like Rick, less of a program, more of a methodology. So one of the things that one of the shifts we made was, look, we're not trying to convince people that they need to measure their marketing. Hopefully, people are starting to get beyond that. What we want to do is when people are crossing that point and they decide, okay, now I don't really trust the data I'm getting from my agencies because I keep changing my agencies and they don't necessarily give it to me in a timely manner, and I've used many of them, or I'm bringing a DMPs in-house, or I'm moving programmatic in-house, whatever it is, they're being flooded with data, right? And they're having to make faster decisions. So when they're in at that point and they go, what the hell do I do? What they're looking for is a consultative engagement, right? And so we come from this position of having a sort of a relatively low number of very sophisticated brands as customers. And so what we found is that they're looking to us for an engagement methodology that enables us to really articulate best practice and relate that specifically to their particular unique characteristics of their business. But what that means to us is taking a much more consultative, best practice, next practice kind of approach to not just the pre-sales, but also post-sales and implementation. And so what that meant was I went and hired a VP of consulting, and we basically created a whole bunch of tools and assets and deliveries and workshop capabilities and so forth, and embedded into every stage of our sales cycle. Now, it's no use to somebody if they're still trying to decide whether they want to do it, but if they're in that solution design phase and then they're getting into, how they then scale that up beyond a single brand and single geography, then it's super powerful for us. So what that's meant is a much higher conversion rate and a much higher lifetime value for us.
Can I ask you, how involved is marketing in that? Once it's in the sales funnel, is marketing still involved, or is it different people?
Yeah, so we keep people nurturing along. It's where we use outreach, for example. We're producing a bunch of collateral. We have, product marketing is responsible for the sort of marketing value assessment stuff. We run the models, kind of some economic metric type stuff. So yeah, they're all the way through. Yeah.
That's great. One of the things that, let's switch and talk a little bit about metrics, because that's a topic that everybody has pretty strong opinions on. And I'd first like to start by asking, what are the key set of metrics? First, what's your metrics philosophy? Because I noticed there's some CMOs that have, 10 pages, pretty intense metrics. And then there's sometimes, it almost becomes not actionable. It's like there's so many dials, which one am I actually modifying? And then there's other folks that are like, yeah, we look at our web traffic, that's it. So kind of what's your metrics philosophy? And if you could address, kind of the key set that you feel are important for operating your business. And let's start with Rick on that one.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I tend to be a little bit more on the analytic intensive side.
10 pages.
Yeah. So we had 50 different Tableau visualizations at my last company. We didn't look at them all every day, but we looked at probably about five daily and 10 weekly. And we kind of look at lots of different slices of the funnel, of course. Looking at opportunity creation, looking at what things are converting. ROI was a big factor for us, so we were always looking at ROI, both actually by influence and also by first touch, where it was, if it was initially generated from marketing. We would look at ROI both by campaign and also by channel as well. We would look at website traffic. We would look at website traffic conversions. How are we doing converting the traffic on the site? Those are probably the big ones, actually. I would say if I had to boil it down to what are the three most important, I would say all the metrics related to the ROI, the funnel, and site traffic and site conversion.
Can I ask another question on that I'd love to know? Do you act on those? Because I find that a lot of organizations measure the crap out of everything, but then they never really do much with it. And I'm curious if you kind of tell folks out here for what you track, what do you then do?
We absolutely acted on them. So we would completely, if something had really bad ROI, a campaign, we would completely turn it off and say why is this other one getting it's getting 15, 25x ROI, but it's a webinar, so how can we do it? But then we could still figure out a way to programatize it. So we actually, for a while, had a daily webinar, a daily demo, because that's what converted. And so we absolutely acted on it, even with website conversions. We would add new tools in that would help with that. Website traffic, you can always break it down right into the source, so we can see actually the place we're not growing enough is actually in social-driven traffic, so we need to do more and take steps in social. Yeah.
Great. Sydney, how about you?
When I got there, all that my CEO cared about was our Alexa ranking and our website traffic. Because that's what the CMO before said was important. So I had low bar, it was good. But he still wants to know my website traffic, which is okay. I finally told him that the reason our Alexa ranking was high is because everybody had the Alexa ping on our own personal computers, and they were gaming the system. Anyway, so I do a monthly dashboard and a monthly review with my marketing leads team on our dashboards. We always start with our funnel, and we look at our conversion rates going through the funnel. We look at channels and how they're performing. When it gets down to campaign and program, we look at that a little bit different, because we do look at a linear attribution model in aggregates. We do try to get in specific campaigns and programs. We have turned off things based on their performance because we look at all the way through closed won. So while it might be a great contributor of responses or inquiries, at the end of the day, it did nothing. So we do have views on that, which is great, and I use Tableau as well. Where we're really trying to work, though, is now that I own the SDRs, that conversion rate. So we look specifically at the funnel that goes through the SDR team and what the velocity is through the stages, and we're working on some Wake the Dead programs, which we'd never done before because we handed it off and then just kind of relied on sales to do that. So now that we're kind of digging into that a little bit more and saying, what can we do to help stuck pipeline? What can we do to reinvigorate things and make sure that they're continuing to convert? So I think it's just a maturity thing where we're at in order to be able to do that.
And you feel monthly is a good cadence to kind of look at some of those key metrics?
So I think at the team level it is. Every program person is looking at their reports on a daily basis. So the guy that owns the channels, he's looking at SEO optimization or whatever it might be. We look at trials every day across all our trials because we've got like 15 of them. And then I'm always poking around. So they don't like that, but that's what I do.
That's great. Stephen, what do you look at?
It's a really long answer, potentially a long answer. It won't be now, I promise. So I think just because you can measure it doesn't mean it's worth measuring, right? For one, like Rick, we sell a marketing performance analytics solution. So we use our own dog food, drink our own champagne, whatever.
And it's amazing, right?
I think the key thing. So when we're engaging with people we sell to and work with, the first set of questions are like, what are the questions you're trying to get answers to? And the response to that is going to be, well, depending on who you're talking to. Is it the CMO? Is it somebody else in New York, the campaign team or whatever? And so there's a different set of answers to that depending on the audience, for one. Secondly, there's a set of questions you're trying to get answers to that you can take some action on, right? That will drive some kind of improvement in efficiency, right, or effectiveness. And then there's going to be a set of KPIs and a set of metrics that inform those KPIs and a set of systems that those metrics come from. I think it's really important to understand what that hierarchy is before you just throw up a dashboard of vanity metrics that just really don't answer any questions. So we see that a lot, right? We see a lot of people, they'll mash up some dashboard in Tableau or something else. They're just pulling data from every system they're activating over. And individually, they don't mean very much, right? The insight is the combination of those things. When you really start to think about, like, what is that engagement for a particular account, for example, across all of the activations we're running cross-channel versus just one particular channel. So I think it's super important, one, to always take a step back and understand, like, one, who's this KPI or dashboard or whatever visualization you're designed for? Is it the weekly board meeting or the CEO's meeting that the CMO has to sit in every Monday morning? In which case, you better damn well know what the CEO cares about. And it's probably not how many search impressions you got or search quality score or something like that. But that may care to somebody who's running the search campaign. So understanding what's applicable to which audience and which question you're trying to get answer to, I think is probably the most important thing you can do before you go out and implement anything. Mm-hmm. So we have to hold, when we're working with clients, we have to hold them back from wanting to implement, right? Because we've seen so many projects fail, and I've been in this situation as well, where you implement a bunch of dashboards, putting a bunch of data, and it's like, well, it's not actionable, right? Or you create some false impression of actual reality. And then we also see things like attribution projects in B2C land, right? Attribution projects, mixed modeling, predictive, and they haven't solved the data problem. So they run an attribution project and come out with some actionable insights. And the reality is, every time you run that project, it turns out a different answer because there's so many issues with the underlying data set. So there's also a foundational aspect of, you got to get the data right first, understand what data is important to you, and then what question you're trying to give an answer to. So that's a very long-winded response, but so there's that. At the end of the day, we really care about CAC LTV, right? Those two things. Those are the CAC LTV ratios are a really big driver for what I think about and what we have to report up to the board, and it's how we make investment decisions. And so that translates specifically down into, hey, we're spending all this time with tire kickers that are never going to buy that much from us. Bad decision. However, we've got a land deal with an account that has a potential multiple $1 billion footprint for us. You know what? We're going to juice up the front end of that. We're going to lose money for the first year, right? Because we did a 3-year deal that's going to generate X. So the CAC LTV thing is super important for us.
Can I add one more thing I forgot we were talking about? So how many of you have win reports that come out, the rah-rah reports? Hey, we just closed such and such account. Hurrah, hurrah. Okay, so what we do, because I know you do this too, is if you use Marketo, there's an opportunity analyzer report, and it's a beautiful thing. So I respond to those with the opportunity analyzer report, which shows, okay, how long did it take to actually get to closed won? And it's got every single interaction that we can track and every single person that was involved in that deal. And all of a sudden, it just brings to life, oh no, actually there were 20 people in that account, and they've been engaging with us across these 20 programs, and it took
For
this
2
time,
years.
and this is where the SDR took it, and this is when it got handed off, and then this is when the SDR picked it back up again, and then it got, handed back off. And it's just a great visualization to show marketing's impact to sales rather than the rah-rah that thanks their SE, their legal, and their finance people for helping them close the deal.
And support.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a really good point. I think that's great that you do that. I think it's very helpful. Before we open it up to questions, I want to ask all of you, if you, in the spirit of growth, were given $100,000 right now, where would you invest that in your companies to drive growth? I'm going to start with you, Rick.
Right now, I think where we're at, I'd actually probably use it on events, because that's actually the thing that's converting the best for us. Field events in particular. But we have kind of maybe a little bit of a unique situation there, because we, it might be a little similar to Alfresco, because of our background as the creators of Spark, we can get a lot of people to come into our events, right? And most of them are trying to run Spark workloads in the Amazon cloud, and so it's pretty good both for converting new business, but it also influences a lot of opportunities as well. So you kind of have to look at field events for both opportunity creation and opportunity influence. But right now, those are very effective for us.
Cool. How about you, Steve? What would you invest in?
With my company hat on, I put it into customer success and implementation because we're capacity constrained at this point there. With my marketing
It's kind of
hat,
boring, though.
Yeah, I know. Generates revenue, though. We like that. From a marketing standpoint, I probably put it into high-value content, actually. So we're seeing our high-value kind of late funnel stage content really generating a lot of engagement. I'm not so sure I'd spend $100,000 on it, but I'd spend a lot of it on that.
Yeah. How about you, Sydney?
My general philosophy is I'll go put it to where I already have things working, and I can get instant acceleration, which currently for us is our event. So we do have a similar background. But I would answer right now, I would put it into our outreach project. So we're also looking at a sales prospecting tool, and I just try and get that implemented faster.
That's great. So we have some time left. We'd love to open it up to questions. Everyone, I know it's the end of the day. You're almost done, but you have these great, talented people here that have good experience. So back there.
How many of you have developed a custom dashboard versus standard dashboard? And if you have developed a custom dashboard, what's the difference? What are the things?
Great. So the question is, how many folks have developed custom dashboards or do you use standard dashboards for reporting?
We've found we generally need custom dashboards. We do use some built-in things in Salesforce. We don't use the product you were talking about in Marketo only because we're on HubSpot at the moment, but I don't think they have something similar, but we tend to find that when you're trying to merge the different table structures in Salesforce and or bring in data from other systems as well and mesh that with the Salesforce data, it's easier to put it into something like Tableau Viz.
Yeah, for very isolated stuff, like we use Salesforce and HubSpot actually, so it's good for some stuff, but generally not that helpful if you're trying to do, cross-channel insights, for example. We use our own tools for that.
Yep. And we customize as well. So we've got Salesforce and Marketo wired, but and this took a little bit of effort because our sales operations guy really liked Excel. So he would extract stuff out of Salesforce, and that's why my head of sales numbers were different than my numbers, because I was extracting real time out of our cleaned data set. So we had to bring him into learning to love Tableau. And now she and I look at the exact same data, but it's completely customized.
I think the question is if you need to do any processing on that data. So if you're just literally taking data out of a source, you can use Gecko board or whatever, just to bring that. You're not doing any correlation or any data modeling between those sources. So again, it depends on what you're trying to do with the data.
So, a lot of good thoughts on dimension. Wondering if you guys have measured the ABM impact on revenues, specific target marketing. I think there's field marketing that was mentioned, but
Yeah.
specific ABM.
So the question's around ABM and target account-based marketing, and if people are seeing an impact on that. I can definitely answer that, but I'll let these folks talk about that.
You go first.
Yeah,
You go first.
I'm,
Go ahead.
I'm happy to answer it.
Okay,
So
great.
I can speak from my experience at Marketo and then at Engagio, and I think one of the things that I was faced with at Marketo, I had our enterprise business and our SMB business, and we started to see the ACV in our SMB business kind of declining a little bit. And one of the things we tried to do was scalable ABM, and we put that in place. And we really focused a lot on an ICP. This is the ideal customer profile. And we implemented a really nice light ABM program. So our sales team would be very focused on a particular profile of company. And long and short of it, it ended up being very successful. We raised the ASP, and we actually saw our retention numbers really improve. And those were the two objectives I had. And I think if you're thoughtful about it and you have set goals in mind, it can actually be really, really effective. But it depends a lot on the product you're selling it, and that, like for this, our deal size, it made sense, and the life cycle, it made sense. But if you're selling something on Amazon, probably not.
Yeah,
That's $20.
I'd echo that. Like, it's super important for us. We have a very specific, pretty sophisticated kind of propensity model in terms of who we think would be highest propensity target for us, and that drives all of our activity, right? Like everything. We qualify out early on if someone doesn't fit that profile. It's really hard to do it if you don't have the tools at scale. So, Heidi's company, I'll do the selling for Engagio. I think they've done a phenomenal job of filling in the gap that Marketo and others didn't have. To get people thinking about, like, how do you orchestrate all of this activity at an account level versus a lead or an opportunity level. Doing it's really hard to do that at scale. And then the content side of the house is really hard to do at scale as well. So again, depending on what you're selling, if you're high velocity, take anyone's money over the phone, not super important. Maybe persona is more important than kind of the account level stuff. But for our business, it's really critical, yeah.
Hi, so I have what I hope is a provocative question for you guys. For the better part of a decade, it seems that technology selling is completely left-brained activity in marketing. To what degree is there room left in marketing for right-brained activities that you can actually drive and connect with buyers? I mean, when you think of the most recent presidential election, that was all about emotion, whether we like the guy or not. How does this figure into current marketing in any of your companies, trying to really drive emotion and brand connection?
That's a good question, so I'll take that one. I believe experience matters. And so in order to create great, memorable experiences and consistency, you have to have a strong visual identity, you have to have a strong brand identity, and you want your culture to reflect that. So if you forget that part of it, I think people will be confused around who you are. Now, does that mean you have to have big ad campaigns? Well, we actually did spend extra money in certain areas around ad campaigns where we engaged an agency and really came up with some creative ideas, and we could see that those were returning higher investment than where we were just using our kind of standard branded platforms, but we just couldn't afford to do it for everything. So we could make proof that if I did have more money, more than $100,000, I could probably take that a little bit further, but where we invested was on a consistent brand experience and at a global scale, which was a big step for us.
Yeah, I also think they're kind of related actually in a way because you're doing all these analytics on like what's successful and what's performing and what's converting and what's bringing in more leads and what kind of CTRs you're getting and what have you. But a lot of that is affected by what the message is or how provocative is it or what kind of story you're telling or what kind of, is it a creative asset? So having the creativity in the content and the asset creation and the branding and the story and the messaging and even like the way that you execute the campaign, it can actually drive the results as well. So they're not unrelated in my mind.
Yeah, I agree with that. Good question, Dan. I think your data informs the insight, right? And you're not going to get some AI engine generating a messaging stack for you, and you're not going to get some machine learning algorithm to come up with a big idea campaign, right? Now, the data will tell you if that's impactful and driving the kind of results that you expect, but I think there's still a lot of room, clearly, for interpretation and for insights, recommendations, actions. Now, you may automate a lot of that at scale, but a lot of those interpretation insights will come from people with experience.
Yeah, I think in B2B marketing, people sometimes forget that, and it's actually even more important because it's so noisy, and if you can't provoke or evoke an emotion in somebody, it's like, yeah, all those tools are the same. It's like, and then it's just a feature battle. So people forget that, but I think it's actually the most important thing that you could do. It's really critical to tell a story, and for everyone in here that works on content and is involved in content, I mean, that's you telling your story. So it's really important. I think we had one more question. Yeah.
So you touched upon the SMB market a little bit. I mean, it's kind of one of the hardest thing, right? I mean, you have got B2C side, you've got B2B where you have bigger deals, and B2C side. But SMB is pretty interesting. You got to run lean, but at the same time you got to show the ROI. So can you touch upon the process, what you should set for SMB marketing to be more effective?
So the question is around SMB marketing being tricky, and it's high velocity and it's fast.
That's right.
And what's the core of your
so
question?
how do you set the process? How do you make
How do you set the
different
process?
than the B2B or B2C?
And okay, does anyone want to cover that, or I can address it too? Yeah, we do both, but I'm happy to take it.
I'll take a run at a perspective. It may not be very insightful, but I think B2C and B2B are merging in terms of we're all consumers as well as you're seeing in a large enterprise trying to buy something from a vendor. So our expectations are changing dramatically in terms of how we expect to be interacted with. And so there's nothing more annoying than these, inappropriate, non-relevant, signals that hit you from some brand that's suddenly got you identified and spamming you with some degree of frequency and forgot about frequency caps. So that's just not appropriate. So I think there's a lot of learning from B2C that's now making its way through SMB into large enterprise selling, which is just people's expectations are very different. The mechanism with which they want to consume content is different. The time of day that they want to consume it on which device is changing. And so we're having to get a lot better at, acquiring all those signals and then harmonizing those signals and then interpreting them and taking action on them. And I think B2B has not necessarily had to deal with that kind of level of scale before. B2C always has. They're trying to deal with the analog to digital conversion. So I think we're learning a lot from the kind of volumes and scales and numbers of interaction points and numbers of variety of signals that B2C has had to deal with for a long time, and B2C is a sort of, if you like, SMB kind of saw that a little earlier because sales cycles tend to be smaller and they have to deal with automation and stuff like that. And performance marketing is a really good example of that, right? You see these performance marketing, growth marketing teams spin up that are like really dealing with daily decisions, right, on how to optimize stuff and which programmatic vendors to work with and so forth. And that feels much more like kind of B2C than it does B2B, but those techniques are working their way over into B2B teams as well. So growth marketing, pretty much every B2B company will have a growth marketing team now, which looks like a high velocity SMB team.
One thing I'd add with SMB, to me, the biggest difference is the pace. So I have SMB and enterprise, and my modeling, so my plan of record for my enterprise business, like I'm going to close a deal in probably 8 months to, it could be a year, whereas SMB, I'm watching that number every month. And so what I look at is a very condensed time frame. So for enterprise, I might say, okay, there's certain activities I want to do. I care about meetings, that's going to be here, and I map all that out. And so to me, I care about all those touch points. They just, they're answering different questions for me at different time points, but SMB, it's condensed. And so, and a lot of SMB reps and your ADR teams, like the numbers they have to put on the board every month really matter, whereas enterprise deals, there's sometimes more swing. So it to me, it's almost like the pace that you run and what you look at is in a different time frame, which I think is important to do.
I would add that in SMB, it's more about product and marketing than it is about sales. Right? So you have to have the product right. And then marketing and awareness and how much awareness you can drive to drive demand to your website, and then how efficient you can be in processing that. That's the biggest difference.
Product market fit, yo. So hopefully this was helpful for everybody. Are there any other questions before we wrap up? Great, thanks.